The island of Oahu, 2003. A tropical paradise known for its golden beaches and swaying palm trees had an undercurrent of unease that summer. The disappearance of 19-year-old Leilani Kanoa had haunted the community for months, leaving friends and family desperate for answers. She was last seen leaving a late-night study session at the University of Hawaii, her backpack slung over one shoulder, a notebook clutched in her hand, and a bright smile that hid her exhaustion from a full day of classes. Her parents, Kamale and Mele Kanoa, received a panicked call from a friend reporting that Leilani had never returned home. That evening, the Kanoa household transformed into a hub of frantic activity. Phones rang off the hook, family members called neighbors, friends scoured her favorite spots on campus and nearby parks. Kamale, a retired Navy officer, had seen emergencies before, but nothing prepared him for the helplessness of not knowing where his daughter was, or if she was even alive. Early the next morning, the Honolulu Police Department was notified. Officers retraced Leilani's steps, interviewing classmates, friends, and campus staff. Surveillance footage from nearby convenience stores and gas stations was collected, but it revealed only fleeting glimpses: a shadow passing a lamppost, a hooded figure walking past the campus library, but no clues pointing to her destination. Her backpack, untouched on her bed, still contained her textbooks and personal items. It was as if she had simply vanished into thin air. The first week was filled with hope and fear in equal measure. Kamale and Mele organized a search party, enlisting friends, neighbors, and volunteers from the university. They scoured the beaches, parks, and nearby hiking trails, leaving flyers pinned to utility poles and bulletin boards across Honolulu. They offered a dedicated tip line, hoping anyone might provide the information that would finally lead them to their daughter. But days turned into weeks with no solid leads. Rumors circulated on campus, some cruel, some plausible, but nothing concrete emerged. Every time the phone rang, Kamale's heart leapt, only to fall again when the news was another dead end. As weeks passed, the case drew media attention. Local news channels covered the search, sharing photos of Leilani's bright eyes and long dark hair, urging anyone with information to come forward. The University of Hawaii campus community rallied together, organizing vigils and late-night candlelight marches, holding on to the belief that Leilani was still alive. Despite the growing public interest, the investigation faced the same challenges that plagued many missing person cases: minimal physical evidence, no verified sightings, and a lack of witnesses who could confirm her last movements. Kamale refused to succumb to despair. He turned his home into a makeshift operations center, maps of the island plastered across the walls, pins marking areas already searched and spots still needing attention. Every call to the tip line was logged meticulously. Every lead, however small, was investigated personally. Mele spent her days distributing flyers, speaking with reporters, and attending community meetings, all while maintaining a fragile routine at home. Their lives became a single shared mission: find Leilani. By 2004, the investigation had reached an impasse. Official searches were scaled back, the tip line received fewer calls, and the community slowly returned to daily life. But for the Kanoa family, hope never wavered entirely. They continued to send reminders to the public, offering rewards and speaking at school events, refusing to let Leilani become just another unsolved case. Then, in 2018, new technology reignited the investigation. Advances in DNA profiling, combined with refined forensic techniques, allowed detectives to re-examine old evidence. A strand of hair found in a secluded hiking area, long thought irrelevant, was sent for analysis. Forensic genealogists matched it to a distant relative of Leilani Kanoa, opening a door that had been closed for 15 years. Detectives began to cross-reference employment records, social connections, and personal histories of individuals who had frequented the hiking trails. One name repeatedly appeared in the investigation logs from 2003: Raymond Takahashi, a 35-year-old landscaper at the time, who had been questioned briefly due to his presence near the trail where the hair was found. At the time, nothing linked him conclusively to Leilani's disappearance, and he was dismissed as a suspect. But modern techniques combined with genealogical data painted a troubling picture. The breakthrough came in early 2019, when investigators obtained a court-approved DNA sample from Takahashi. The results were undeniable. His DNA matched genetic material found on the strand of hair and other items recovered from the original search area. Investigators moved quickly, piecing together a timeline of his movements and activities during the week Leilani disappeared. Witnesses previously overlooked or intimidated into silence were re-interviewed, revealing patterns of behavior that had gone unnoticed in 2003. By June 2019, law enforcement officials were confident they had identified the person responsible for Leilani Kanoa's disappearance. A carefully coordinated operation was planned to arrest Takahashi without incident, taking into account both his potential danger and the intense public scrutiny the case had attracted. On a quiet Thursday morning, Takahashi was apprehended outside his home in Kapolei. He was taken into custody without resistance, his neighbors in shock. To them, he had always appeared quiet and unassuming, blending seamlessly into the fabric of the island community. The news of Raymond Takahashi's arrest spread across Oahu like wildfire. Friends and neighbors struggled to reconcile the quiet, polite man they had known for years with the horror he had allegedly committed. Social media erupted. Local news ran continuous updates, and community meetings were organized to process the shock. For Kamalai and Mele Kanoa, the arrest was a surreal mixture of relief, anger, and grief. After 16 long years of uncertainty, they finally had an answer. But the reality of confronting the person responsible for their daughter's disappearance was almost unbearable. Kamalai, now 68, and with his health weakened by decades of stress, insisted on being present at the initial hearings. He wanted to see Takahashi, to witness the man who had haunted their lives for so long brought to justice. Mele, a small-framed woman with a quiet but steadfast demeanor, chose not to attend. "I can't look at him," she said through tears. "Not until justice is done. Not until we know Leilani is at peace." Their surviving daughter, Lani, barely 21, had spent her teen years attending vigils and hearing the whispers of her older sister's absence. She had grown up in a shadow of fear, uncertainty, and the constant media attention that comes with a high-profile missing person case. The arrest brought her a complex mixture of relief and anxiety. Relief that the investigation had finally moved forward, and anxiety over confronting decades of fear and trauma head-on. Investigators immediately began assembling a meticulous timeline. Digital tools allowed them to reconstruct Takahashi's movements in 2003, mapping his presence near Leilani's last known locations. Forensic teams revisited old evidence with modern technology. Items recovered during the initial 2003 searches, such as a water bottle found along a hiking trail, a discarded jacket, and Leilani's notebook discovered in a remote bush, were re-examined. Each piece provided additional confirmation of Takahashi's involvement. DNA recovered from the jacket matched Takahashi, confirming he had been in close contact with the area where Leilani vanished. Fiber analysis linked his clothing to items found near the trailhead. Hand pollen samples suggested he had moved through multiple regions, matching the path investigators believed Leilani had taken that fateful night. The psychological impact on the family was immense. Kamalai described sleepless nights spent revisiting the investigation's failures. "For years I blamed myself," he said. "Maybe I should have done more, searched harder, been faster." Seeing Takahashi arrested doesn't erase the years of uncertainty, but it finally feels like we're taking back some control. Mele spent her days meeting with grief counselors, attending court updates, and connecting with other families who had endured long-term uncertainty. Lani balanced college life with emotional support for her parents. often skipping classes or leaving early to attend court proceedings. The prosecution prepared to present a case built on both modern forensic evidence and decades of historical context. Witnesses who had come forward in 2003 were re-interviewed. One of Leilani's classmates, who had once reported seeing a man near the trail but had been dismissed at the time, now provided critical testimony, corroborating Takahashi's presence on the day of Leilani's disappearance. Several park rangers who had patrolled the hiking areas recalled unusual behavior, such as Takahashi frequently asking questions about trail conditions and isolated areas, often without clear explanation. During the pre-trial hearings, defense attorneys attempted to challenge the validity of old evidence, arguing that memories fade and DNA degradation over time could produce unreliable results. But forensic experts demonstrated the precision of modern techniques, showing how even a single hair strand could be conclusively linked to Takahashi. The analysis combined mitochondrial DNA testing, nuclear DNA, and cross-referencing with genealogical. While the trial preparation continued, the community of Oahu struggled to cope with the resurfacing trauma. Local high schools held special assemblies discussing safety, awareness, and the importance of reporting suspicious activity. Students organized candlelight vigils, some bringing flowers and handwritten notes for Leilani, whose absence had touched an entire generation. Psychologists working with families of missing persons spoke publicly, highlighting how long-term uncertainty can shape behavior, trust, and emotional health. Kamale and Mele, despite the years of pain, found ways to reclaim fragments of normal life. They continued working with volunteer search groups, providing insight into best practices for cold case investigations. They spoke at events, sharing their story to encourage vigilance, hope, and the importance of never giving up on missing persons cases. Their home, once a place of near-constant anxiety, began to incorporate moments of calm. Mele returned to her garden, tending orchids and hibiscus that reminded her of Leilani's love for flowers. Kamale began teaching self-defense classes for teenagers, emphasizing safety during hiking trips and outdoor activities. By late 2019, the trial began. Social distancing measures were not yet required, and the courtroom was filled with family members, journalists, and local residents. The prosecution opened with a detailed account of Leilani's disappearance, the initial investigation, and the tireless work to re-examine the evidence using new technology. They walked the jury through the forensic breakthroughs, DNA matches, fiber analyses, and witness testimony, all pointing conclusively to Takahashi. Photos of the hiking trails, maps showing his frequent movements, and recreations of the scene were presented with precision, ensuring the jury could visualize the events that had long eluded understanding. The defense, faced with irrefutable evidence, focused primarily on Takahashi's demeanor and age, suggesting that decades in prison would be inhumane. They portrayed him as a man who had blended seamlessly into the community, highlighting letters of community service, his quiet work as a landscaper, and interactions with neighbors that painted him as ordinary, if private. But the prosecution countered with the emotional testimony of Leilani's family, emphasizing the human cost of the crime. Kamale's voice shook as he recounted the sleepless nights, the futile searches, and the emotional toll on the family. Lani described her struggles with fear and uncertainty. The night she cried herself to sleep, wondering if she would ever see her sister again. After a 3-week trial, the jury deliberated for just under 5 hours. When they returned, the foreperson stood and read the verdict, guilty on all counts related to the abduction and murder of Leilani Kanoa. The courtroom erupted in a mixture of relief and subdued sobbing. For the Kanoa family, justice had finally been realized, even if the wounds remained. Judge Kamala Iwasa sentenced Takahashi to life without the possibility of parole, stating, "While decades have passed, the gravity of this crime remains. No length of time diminishes the value of Leilani Kanwa's life or the suffering endured by her family. Justice may have been delayed, but it has not been denied. For Kamale, hearing the sentence allowed a sense of closure he had never known. "It won't bring Leilani back," he said after the trial, voice heavy with emotion. "But it confirms that she mattered, that her life mattered, and that the truth, no matter how long it takes, eventually comes to light." Mele visited Leilani's favorite beach, scattering flowers into the Pacific waves, a quiet farewell, a way to honor her daughter's memory. Lani, now a young woman shaped by years of uncertainty, began volunteering with local organizations supporting missing persons and their families, ensuring that Leilani's story would continue to inspire vigilance and hope. The community of Oahu, too, learned from this case. Schools incorporated lessons on personal safety and community responsibility. Local authorities established updated protocols for missing person reports, emphasizing rapid response, evidence preservation, and the use of emerging technologies. Volunteer search groups grew stronger, more organized, and better equipped to support families in crisis. The case became a blueprint for cold case investigations in Hawaii, demonstrating how persistence, technology, and community collaboration could bring resolution, even after 16 years. The trial of Raymond Takahashi drew attention from across the state, even nationally, as journalists, true crime enthusiasts, and advocates for missing persons followed the proceedings closely. Courtroom seats were filled daily with members of the public, reporters with cameras and microphones, and law enforcement observers eager to study how decades-old evidence could now lead to a conviction. The Kanoa family, though emotionally drained, understood the importance of their presence. They wanted the world to see the cost of a crime that had gone unsolved for so long, and the toll it had taken on a family forced to live in limbo. From the opening statements, it was clear the prosecution would rely heavily on forensic evidence that had only become possible with modern technology. DNA extracted from items collected in 2003, combined with genealogical analysis and trace evidence, painted a clear picture of Takahashi's involvement. Microscopic fibers from his clothing matched those recovered near the hiking trail where Leilani had been last seen. Pollen analysis and soil composition studies confirmed the locations she had been moved through, aligning perfectly with his known movements that October night. Witness testimony reinforced the scientific evidence, with park rangers, hikers, and even former colleagues recalling unusual behavior that, at the time, had seemed harmless, but now fit a chilling pattern. The prosecution presented a chronological reconstruction of Takahashi's actions in October 2003. They detailed his preparation, his movements on the day Leilani disappeared, and the ways he had attempted to conceal evidence. Maps were displayed showing his proximity to key locations: the trailhead, the abandoned beach access path, and the dense forest where forensic teams later recovered DNA evidence. The jury saw photographs of items carefully preserved for over a decade, including the water bottle, the jacket, and the notebook. Each item told a story of the events that had led to Leilani's disappearance. The defense attempted to cast doubt on the reliability of evidence collected so many years ago, suggesting contamination, degradation, and memory lapses in witness recollections. Takahashi's lawyers emphasized his quiet life since 2003, portraying him as a harmless, if reclusive, community member. Letters of commendation for volunteer work, neighborhood assistance, and church involvement were presented, aiming to humanize a man accused of a horrific crime. Yet the weight of the forensic evidence proved overwhelming. Experts explained in clear, accessible terms how even a single hair, when analyzed using modern DNA techniques, could conclusively tie Takahashi to Leilani. Fiber analysis, soil chemistry, and microtrace studies, once unavailable in 2003, now provided undeniable proof. A key breakthrough came when genealogical databases were used to link Takahashi to DNA evidence from the recovered jacket. The combination of old and new science left little room for doubt. Family testimony was particularly powerful. Carmelet spoke from the heart, recounting the relentless search for his daughter and the emotional toll of living in a state of uncertainty for 16 years. He described the daily fear, the sleepless nights, and the constant hope that somehow Leilani would return. Mele, though she did not attend every session, shared a recorded statement with the court, her voice trembling as she reflected on the life her daughter would never have, the milestones missed, and the emptiness that had dominated their household. Lani, her younger sister, recounted her childhood shadowed by the disappearance, the quiet anxiety that followed her through school, and the resilience she had developed while supporting her grieving parents. Witnesses from 2003 who had initially been overlooked or dismissed now took the stand. One park ranger, who had once noticed Takahashi asking suspicious questions about isolated trails, described how at the time it had seemed benign but now looked intentional. A former colleague who had shared a work van with Takahashi spoke of his unusual behavior, how he seemed fixated on certain areas of Oahu where Leilani had been seen, and how he often avoided direct questions about his activities. Their testimonies provided context, humanizing the data and connecting the scientific findings to observable behavior. As the trial progressed, the community of Oahu followed every development with a mixture of anxiety and hope. Local newspapers published daily updates, and online forums became spaces for discussion and support for families with missing loved ones. Volunteers who had participated in the initial searches returned to the trails, often leaving flowers or candles in honor of Leilani, creating a quiet, living memorial to the young woman who had vanished so long ago. In court, prosecutors emphasized the deliberate nature of Takahashi's actions. He had carefully chosen locations, concealed evidence, and lived among the community for over a decade without detection. They highlighted how his behavior exploited the trust and assumptions of those around him, showing how ordinary, unremarkable appearances can mask deeply criminal intentions. Forensic psychologists testified, explaining how predators often integrate seamlessly into their communities. Maintaining a facade of normalcy, the defense's strategy shifted in response, focusing on Takahashi's age and health. By the time of the trial, he was 63, and his attorneys argued that any lengthy prison sentence would be excessively harsh. They portrayed him as a man whose actions were long past, who had led a quiet life since the crime, and who posed no further threat to society. But the jury, after reviewing the overwhelming evidence and listening to the stories of those affected, remained unmoved by these arguments. After 3 weeks of hearings, witness testimonies and expert reports, the jury retired to deliberate. The process was emotionally charged. Family members waited in tense silence, knowing that the verdict would bring the first definitive answers in over a decade and a half. For Carmelet and Mele, the wait was almost unbearable. Friends and extended family offered comfort, but there was a collective understanding that this moment could alter their lives forever. 5 hours later, the jury returned. Foreperson Emily Nakamura read the verdict aloud, guilty on all counts related to the abduction and murder of Leilani Kanoa. The courtroom responded with a mixture of relief, tears, and quiet sobs. Carmelet's hands shook as he clutched Mele's arm, both of them finally allowing themselves to feel a weight lift that had pressed on their hearts for 16 years. Lani, sitting quietly, wiped away tears as a sense of justice began to replace years of fear and uncertainty. Judge Keone Matsuda delivered the sentencing. He spoke of the enduring impact of the crime, the pain inflicted on the family and community, and the importance of acknowledging each life lost. Takahashi was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole, the judge noting that while years had passed, the gravity of the crime remained unchanged. Justice, though delayed, had finally been realized. In the weeks following the verdict, the Kanoa family began the slow process of reclaiming fragments of their lives. Kamale returned to his work as a community organizer, using his experience to teach search and safety strategies to local youth. Mele found solace in daily walks along the trails Leilani had loved, now transformed into quiet, reflective spaces where she could honor her daughter's memory. Lani became an advocate for missing persons, sharing her family's story at schools, community centers, and support groups, ensuring that Leilani's legacy would help others facing uncertainty. The case also had a profound effect on the community. Local authorities implemented updated protocols for missing persons, emphasizing rapid response, proper evidence handling, and the integration of emerging forensic technology. Volunteer search networks became more organized and trained, better equipped to assist families in crisis. Schools incorporated lessons on personal safety, awareness, and community responsibility, teaching young people how to recognize danger and respond appropriately. Leilani Kanoa's story became a symbol of hope, resilience, and the power of perseverance. It demonstrated that even when decades pass, justice can prevail with the combined efforts of dedicated investigators, advanced technology, and an unwavering commitment from those who refuse to give up. For the Kanoa family, the journey had been long and painful. But the conviction of Raymond Takahashi allowed them finally to begin the process of healing. In the months following Raymond Takahashi's conviction, the ripples of the case extended far beyond the courtroom. For the Kanoa family, life slowly shifted from a daily existence defined by fear, anxiety, and grief toward one of remembrance, advocacy, and cautious optimism. Kamale, Mele, and Lani began to reconnect with the community, attending memorial events and sharing their story to ensure that Leilani's life and the lessons learned from her tragic disappearance would not be forgotten. The Kanoa family established the Leilani Kanoa Foundation, a non-profit dedicated to supporting families of missing persons and funding advanced forensic research. Their goal was clear: no other family should endure the uncertainty, isolation, and frustration that had marked 16 years of waiting. The foundation offered grants for cold case investigations, sponsored training programs for law enforcement on emerging DNA techniques, and partnered with local search and rescue teams to improve efficiency and coordination. In schools across Oahu, educators began integrating modules on personal safety, community awareness, and the importance of speaking up when something seemed off. Lani often visited classrooms, sharing a message that resonated deeply with students. Trust your instincts. Ask questions. Don't stay silent. Her words were rooted in experience, a reminder of how small observations, like those overlooked in 2003, could make the difference between life and death. Law enforcement agencies, both locally and statewide, took note of the case's unique combination of old and new investigative methods. The Hawaii State Police developed a formal cold case unit, modeled in part after the meticulous techniques used to identify Takahashi as Leilani's killer. Investigators underwent specialized training in forensic genealogy, microtrace analysis, and evidence preservation, ensuring that decades-old cases could be revisited with modern tools. The Kanoa family also turned inward,